Are you ready to print out your patterns from Adobe Illustrator that you just finished drafting? Well, today we're going to go into how I print off my patterns. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love to digitally apparel pattern in Adobe Illustrator. I love the creativity that comes out in my different clothes as I'm creating. So today, let's bring up Illustrator and get started setting up those boards so that we can print at home. There we go. I just brought up one of my recent projects. It is a pink zipper shirt. If you want to see how it was drafted, definitely check the link above. You can also see that it is already graded to many different sizes so that any of my friends who want to recreate it can pick the size that best suits them and recreate it themselves. You can see how I graded it in another video up here as well. And today we are going to print off this pattern, putting it on 8.5 by 11 artboards so that we can print it off at home. We're going to make sure that our pattern does not go outside of the print area on the paper. That is essential so that you make sure that your pattern you don't lose anything in your pattern when it's being transferred from the computer to the paper. So let's get started. The first thing that I always do is I have a blank print layout set up, and we're going to, there it is right there. So all I did is I created an artboard that was 8.5 by 11, what I'm going to be printing on, and then I copied that artboard and put them all next to each other. I went a little bit longer on this one. Sometimes you're going to go wider. It just depends. If you want to rearrange these, all you have to do is go into document setup and into the artboards, and then you can select them little by little and say I wanted to add just one more row of columns over there. I'm going to rearrange them, and I'm going to say give me 7 rows instead, and I want 0 spacing in between. Hit OK, and there. They are immediately rearranged to the width I want them. And if you need more artboards, just copy and paste new ones on. And I also know that they are placed right next to each other. There is no spacing around them, which is not a huge deal with how I'm doing that. If you have a little bit of wiggle room in your pattern, you can just do a copy paste straight onto this artboards. And then you might have a little bit of the pattern not quite matching up when you're lining up your patterns. You also might have a little extra fabric in there, a little not as, it might take, a 1/4 of an inch out of your pattern. So it just depends on how precise you need to be when you are printing off the pattern of how you're going to do it. But for me, I like to make sure that my pattern doesn't lose anything from the computer to the printing. So what I do is I create squares that are an inch smaller than 8.5 by 11. So I create squares that are 7.5 by 10. And I make sure that my pattern can fit within those squares. Then, once I know that this is like the basic layout of my pattern, what I do is I cut all the pieces behind them, and then I go through and group everything. So I know this guy, let's get off artboards. There we go. This guy is going to be grouped together, and this guy is going to be, don't know why I did that, grouped together as well. You want to make sure that every single pattern piece is grouped, even ones that have nothing in them, because actually there's multiple layers within this blank square right here, because I have all my different sizes behind that. So you want to make sure they all get grouped together so that when you are making it all, finessing it onto your artboards, it actually works out the way it's supposed to. Then once I have them all grouped, I go back to my blank page and I copy paste it on. Now I figured out in this one that I would need 15 rows to actually complete this particular pattern. So I went back in, I changed it so I had 15 long, and then I knew I would need to add a few more rows down at the bottom. So made them so that it was 15 long, and then I just copied and pasted, and I put each one of these, if I can grab it. Oh, it's because I have the numbers on. So I have each one of these centered on my 8.5 by 11, but it's definitely it's in the print area because it is an inch. We have 1/2 inch seam allowance all around the end. The last thing that I like to do is I like to add numbers so that I can easily find the way that the pattern goes together as I'm taping it. I always find it easier to have numbers because I can then line them up right next to each other. Sometimes I find they print out of order and I'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 27, 28, 29, 12, 13, 14. It sometimes jumps around. I haven't quite figured out why it does that all the time, but sometimes likes to save in an interesting order that's not perfectly 1 through 60. So I always like to have those numbers. Now you can either make them really small on the page and not have them in your pattern as much, or you can make them big and light gray. The other thing that I always like to do is have the numbers on the back of the pattern. So if we actually use the 7 as an example, you can see all the pattern pieces are on top of the 7. The 7 is located behind the pattern so that you can always see it, because if the numbers, let me drag them on top, were on top of the 7, they would actually be blocking part of where the pattern needs to get cut. And that is no good for anybody that is That is no good for anybody who needs to be cutting right through that 7. You want to make sure that anybody can figure out that pattern. And then all I have to do is save this as a PDF and send it to my friends if they want it, or you can print straight from Adobe Illustrator, and all you have to do is go to File, Print, and it'll bring up, and you'll just go through your normal click through, and then you can be printing your own patterns at home. And that is how easy it is to get yourself printing your own patterns that you drafted in Adobe Illustrator at home. This ensures that nothing is lost from your patterns. All of your lines will be the same width as you have them measured on the computer, and there will be no air in the printing dead space around the edges because we have eliminated it. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so that you can continue to learn how to digitally apparel pattern in Adobe Illustrator. And I hope to see you in some of my other videos. Happy patterning!